And we have a few administrative things to do at the beginning. Before I even call the meeting to order, we have two new commission members who I hope you had a chance to meet yesterday. Michael Ellison and Tim Baumgartner, they're here for the first time. And then Commissioner McDonald Gibson was appointed effective July 1st, but was not able to attend the July meeting because of the conflict. So we're going to include all three in swearing in today. So we do have someone here who can administer the oath and officially welcome you to the Environmental Management Commission. So we'll start with that swearing in ceremony. You ready? I'm sorry. 1 minute. I'm sorry. That's fine. That's fine.
Stand. And we go all together.
Thank you very much. So we'll call the meeting to order. The first action item is approval of the minutes for the July meeting. And everyone have a chance to sign their oaths and take a seat. Oh, I'm sorry, I totally skipped a step. Again, related to swearing in new commission members, Councilor Reynolds needs to read into the record the conclusions of the ethics statements, ethics review letters for the two newest members of the commission. So I'll have Councilor Reynolds do that.
Welcome to the new members as well. Thank you, Madam Chair. As members of the commission are aware, for every time there's an appointment, unless the person being appointed is already serving on another board or commission, the Ethics Commission does an evaluation of the statements of economic interest, and it's required that these evaluations be kept on file as part of the public record. I'll read now the relevant portions of the evaluations into the minutes. Note that they will be kept on record. Sorry, I won't read word for word every one of these letters, but no need for that much. But I will start with the first one I have in my hand, which is Commissioner Ellison. Good to see you this morning, sir. Mr. Ellison's statement of economic interest, that's an appointment to the Environmental Management Commission, has been reviewed for actual and potential conflicts of interest pursuant to Chapter 138A of the North Carolina General Statutes, known as the State Government Ethics Act. Commission did not find an actual conflict of interest, but found the potential for a conflict of interest. The potential conflict identified does not prohibit service on this entity. Mr. Ellison is employed by the consulting engineering firm WK Dixon and Companies. The company's services include stormwater management, watershed sciences, and wastewater design and engineering. Mr. Ellison is advised to maintain an awareness of the matters coming before the commission and evaluate, as each of you are always required to do at the beginning of the meeting, whether the matters coming before the commission presents an actual or potential conflict of interest. Again, welcome. The next one I have is Mr. Baumgartner's. Already read sort of the general parts of it, so I'll jump straight into the commission did not find an actual conflict of interest, but found the potential for a conflict of interest. And that potential conflict identified does not prohibit service on this entity. Mr. Baumgartner is a senior environmental manager employed by Ecosystems Planning and Restoration. As such, he has a potential for a conflict of interest and should exercise appropriate caution in the performance of his duties should any issues involving ecosystems planning and restoration of the clients come before the commission for public for official action. Mr. Baumgartner, as you all know, used to work with the division and had an opportunity to work with him on occasion before and always enjoyed it. So welcome, Mr. Baumgartner. And then finally, Dr. Jacqueline McDonald Gibson. Welcome, Dr. McDonald Gibson. We have, the commission has reviewed the statement of economic interest for actual and potential conflicts of interest. The commission did not find an actual conflict of interest, found the potential for a conflict of interest. The potential conflict identified does not prohibit service on this entity. Dr. McDonald Gibson would fill the role of a member who has special training or scientific expertise in hydrology and water pollution control. Her spouse is employed by Paper Culture, a company that partners with environmental organizations and various manufacturers to create sustainable products. As such, Dr. McDonald Gibson has a potential for a conflict of interest and should exercise appropriate caution in the performance of her public duties. Should issues involving any of these entities come before the commission for official action. Welcome, Dr. McDonald Gibson. Good. Chair.
Thank you very much. And that's a good segue into reminding everyone, as I need to do at the beginning of every meeting, that General Statute 138A-15 requires the chair to remind all members of their duty to avoid conflicts of interest and inquire as to whether any member has a known conflict of interest with respect to any of the matters coming before the board today. Does anyone know of a conflict of interest? Seeing none, we can move on to the first action item on the agenda. Welcome, Commissioner Solomon, who, like the rest of us, had to conquer the parking lot.
I've parked over next week and walked back.
We appreciate that. It was a challenge this morning. The first action item is, the first information item. I've lost myself. First action item is approval of the minutes from the commission meeting for July. Is there a motion to approve the minutes for the July meeting?
Commissioner Williams, I move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second to the motion? Commissioner Tweedy seconds the motion. Is there any discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes as submitted, please say aye. Any opposed? No. Thank you very much. And now we're at the first information item, which is the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan. Jimmy Johnson will be presenting that. And while Jimmy's getting ready, I'll just say thank you again to all the folks who have planned the field trips yesterday. That was a great experience. It went extremely well. And between Director Rogers and I, we managed to make the weather work. Talk to us about planning your next outing. Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to present to you all just sort of an update on the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan. And Megan is here with me, and she also will join me in a few minutes in the presentation. Fisheries Reform Act came out or was approved by the General Assembly in 1997. And one of the primary goals of that act was for the Marine Fisheries Commission, the EMC, and the CRC to work together to help improve water quality. And I dare say that the event that we had yesterday probably would not have taken place prior to the Fisheries Reform Act and the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan being put in place. But the primary goal was to cause the three commissions to work together along with the agency people in the different divisions and come together and discuss overarching goals and issues that the three commissions have. And the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan, it was one of 5 main areas of reform for fisheries per se. The basic premise behind the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan is that we can do all that we can to improve fish stocks, but unless we improve habitat and water quality, then there is very little that's going to be sustainable with fisheries. And so the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan was born. It was first signed by the commission chairs and adopted by the commissions in late 2004, and implementation began in 2005. The approach of the legislature, as I mentioned, was to improve communications. And yesterday was a real good example of some improved communications between the commissions, between the different agencies and their staff. The first plan, as I mentioned, was completed in 2004. It began implementation in 2005. The act requires that the plan be revised or amended once every 5 years. And so the most recent amendment took place in 2021, and that's the one that we are primarily working on today. The CHIP is basically governed by a steering committee with 2 members from each of the 3 commissions. Yvonne Bailey, Commissioner Bailey, and David Anderson were the representatives from the EMC. We're hoping that Yvonne will stay, and look forward to who the chair will appoint to replace David Anderson on the steering committee. But the responsibility of the steering committee is to review and approve recommended actions and the revised drafts once every 5 years. We also, the steering committee, we rely on them to help to review implementation progress as we move through the recommendations and implementing them on a regular basis. The CHIP team is made up of staff from the agency. Many of the CHIP team were on the field trip yesterday, and I hope you all had an opportunity to talk to them as they represented their different divisions and agencies. But the CHIP team, they have their own separate meetings, and they're the ones that provide input to and from their divisions as to how the implementation is going with regards to the recommendations found in the CHIP. This is a screen of the 6 habitats that are identified by the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan that are important and that need to be conserved, preserved, maybe even improved as we move through the recommendations found in the plans. There's a tremendous amount of literature that support the linkage between habitats and sustainable fisheries. And as you heard yesterday, North Carolina is the home of approximately 2.3 million acres of estuarine waters. It's more than any state on the East Coast. And it has quite a diversity of fish habitats that are crucial to our coastal fisheries. The as I mentioned, the CHIP identifies 6 fish habitats that need protection, restoration, or enhancement, and these habitats are known to be important to fisheries, to fish species, as place where they can seek refuge, and also a place where they can forage for food. And at sometime of their lives, almost 90% of the commercially and recreationally pursued fish spend some portion of their life cycle in our estuarine habitats. The protection of these areas and habitats is critical to the protection and the endurance of North Carolina's fishery resources and the ways of life that these resources support. And oftentimes, a single habitat is not enough to describe where organisms might live because the fish move back and forth between these different habitats. What exactly is the CHIP? Well, the CHIP is a document that summarizes the most recent and the latest science to aid in the management of fish habitat and water quality. It's a resource for agencies, and there are a number of agencies that are involved in this endeavor. The Marine Fisheries, the Coastal Management, DWR, DMLR, Mitigation Services. We also have input and participation from North Carolina Forest Service, as well as the Soil and Water Conservation Districts. They all participate in our team meetings. The CHIP is organized by habitats, and those chapters of the habitats recognize the threats. They set up priority issues, and they make recommendations as to how best to handle some of the issues that arise from the latest science. There's a description of the habitats in there, the ecological significance of those habitats, and what the status and trends are with regards to the habitats. You can see that the threats included are physical, hydrological, as well as water quality, and the priority issues and recommendations are found in each one of the descriptors of the habitats. And from all of that, we have developed the CHIP and its most recent amendment. And the most recent amendment is going to focus, or is focusing on five specific issues. We wanted to narrow down the scope and the focus. And so we decided that we would amend the document rather than revising it again, allowing us to concentrate and to focus on the five different issues that are mentioned in the white papers of the amendment. Here you see a map of the distribution of the habitats throughout coastal North Carolina. And as you can see, there is a vast diversity of habitats with different landscape positions within the estuary and nearshore waters. Information is included in the plan itself on habitat requirements, ecological value, and their statuses, as I mentioned just a moment ago. And with that, I think Ann is going to come and take over presentation.
Good morning. Thank you everyone for having us here. And we don't want to repeat what you might have heard on the field trip yesterday, but we're just going to highlight some of the implementation that's taken place to date. So in front of you on this slide, why hear about habitat protection? And I wanted to point out that it's not just about fisheries. You know, why should EMC care about what Marine Fisheries Commission has to do? These habitats are providing services for everyone. So even if you don't like to eat fish, our coastal habitats are working for you. And I also want to point out that the river basins, the coastal draining river basins cover more than 50% of our state. So, you know, water drains downhill, and there are issues here on the coast immediately, but when you think about the coastal habitat plan, don't just think about Moorhead and its immediate close area. Think about the Cape Fear River, think about Neuse and Tornillo, all drain down here, and it's a big system. So some of the services that these habitats are providing, as you know, flood control is a big benefit of our wetlands. So we also know we are losing wetlands from permitted activities and non-permitted activities and things like you heard about yesterday, climate change and sea level rise. Oysteries also provide erosion control, as do the wetlands, and they both filter pollutants out. So they benefit water quality. It's free water quality treatment. SAV also plays an important role in water quality enhancement. It's also sensitive. It requires really good clear light, but it absorbs carbon dioxide because of the plant, and it releases oxygen. So it provides oxygen into the water, and it binds the sediment, reducing sediment turbidity. So together, these are all supporting our coastal economy, which reaches across the state through recreation, tourism, and the whole package. And because of the flood control and erosion control and water quality, it's helping our communities be more resilient to what lies ahead in the future. So as Jimmy pointed out, we've been doing the coastal habitat plan. The first one was completed in 2005, and there have been a lot of accomplishments, and some of those tend to be, you know, abstract, but some of the highlights we've had is some real progress on living shorelines. When we started the coastal habitat plan, bulkheads were the norm, and living shorelines were a novelty that a lot of people didn't really understand, and they were concerned how effective they would be. So one thing that the CHIP helped do was bring together people, the collaboration, that's the key. So we got research focused, and we had North Carolina researchers doing, getting funding to do a lot of work to look at how does it affect the fish, how does it affect the wetlands, how does it, you know, and comparing it to bulkheads and natural shorelines. And that gave people the confidence to do more of these. And there's been outreach on living shorelines and increasing just done in public areas so people can get more familiar with them. Coastal stormwater rules, when the coastal habitat plan started, didn't exist. Yeah, there was just a blanket stormwater rules. So now we do have some more protection, and that was a good thing. Although for those on the field trip, if you remember what we met Professor Rodriguez when we were out in Haystacks, and he was talking about the research he did. It was a CRUFL funded grant, which the Division of Marine Fisheries provides an RFP for. And it looked at rates of sedimentation in 8 tidal creeks. Half were in New Hanover, half were in Carteret. And they looked at sedimentation over time, and not just in the past, but now. And they could see an accelerated increase in sedimentation rates. And it varied by the land use activities. So they saw a clear connection with the land use activities and sedimentation. And to me, that's an indication that while we have done a lot and we have rules about stormwater runoff, there's still room for improvement. There's still a second part of that research was to look at the effect of that on the habitats and the fish, and the results of that aren't done yet. So stay tuned for that. Other progress has been with oyster restoration through partnering. So most of that has been done through Division of Marine Fisheries partnering with North Carolina Coastal Federation. But it benefits water quality extremely, but it's expensive. So it's much better to protect what we have than to restore. But today we really wanted to focus on what the priority issues were in the 2021 amendment and then what progress we've made. So that plan finished and was approved unanimously by all of you and all the other commissions the end of 2021. So we're almost at 2-year point. And we do these updates on 5-year cycles. So on the slides, you'll see some of the actions are bolded, and the bolded ones are with a check mark, are ones that we've started or have completed. So the first priority action was protecting SAV protection and restoration through water quality improvements. So by approving the plan, all the commissions agreed to commit protecting and restoring 191,000 acres of SAB, which is what we are a historical extent that we know of. And when I say historical, I'm only going back to the 1980s. So we probably had more, but we took a reasonable number to set as our target. And so all the other actions are geared at making that happen. And it is a mixture of non-regulatory actions and some regulatory actions and outreach. So that second bullet, enhanced development of watershed restoration plans to protect and restore habitats and hydrology through nature-based solutions. So what that means is we want to increase watershed restoration plans that communities can do. And there are grants out there under the Division of Water Resources to help with that. And there's other avenues as well. And once they have that restoration plan, they can look at better ways to manage runoff on their property. So the nature-based solutions are finding a way for it to infiltrate on site rather than run off into our streams and rivers. So we are working, a lot of the CHIP team members are working through an existing interagency watershed restoration improvement team. That's called RIT. So you may have heard some updates on that at some of your other meetings. So we participate that and we're just brainstorming and trying to increase nature-based solutions through a variety of means. Soil and water districts are pulled into that as well as forestry. So it's more than just DEQ. So we do have, there is a need to get more strategies to increase the effectiveness of stormwater BMPs. And that falls mostly under DMLR, used to be under DWR, and when they reorganized at some point, stormwater and sedimentation falls under DMLR. And they are also involved with the coastal habitat efforts because they weren't listed in the statute because it wasn't organized like that at the time, but we include them as part of the team. So I guess what I'm saying is the effort is there, but it directly ties to DWR. MFC also plays a role in turbidity by how they regulate bottom disturbing gear. And so another action that's underway that's not on here, listed here, is they just finished their shrimp fishery management plan somewhat recently. One of the actions is to refine the boundaries where trawling is allowed. So most of the SAB is outside of where you can trawl, but because it varies and moves, they're looking at all the boundaries and they're going to be actually restricting some areas more. And that process is underway right now. So we're all, if we can all do a little bit, maybe we'll get enough to sustain our ecosystem. All right, the second issue was wetland protection and restoration through the nature-based solutions. So you can see the connection. We need to improve water quality for SAV, and we want wetlands for many reasons, including fish, including flood control, including erosion control and water quality. So if we use these nature-based solutions to protect and restore wetlands, we'll also have more wetlands, we'll also benefit the SAV. So one of those actions that we have been working on is obtaining updated high resolution coastal wetland maps, and it would also include land uses. So we've had several interagency staff meetings with the divisions in DEQ, and there is a lot of interest and a lot of commonality in what we need. Right now, the best opportunity seems to be NOAA's CCAP program, and they can provide us with 1 meter resolution wetlands, well, more than wetlands, coastal county land use classifications that would include the wetlands. And that's kind of, that's critical for helping determine where we can protect wetlands, where we need to be protecting the low-lying uplands that are adjacent to it to allow that marsh migration. So that's underway, not nearly done, but we've made progress. Another is, one of the actions was to participate in the, what you heard about yesterday, the SASME plan. So South Atlantic Salt Marsh Initiative. And we did, not only myself, many of the CHIP team members and division members participated in that. So they do have their final plan, And we're now at the stage where it's transitioning for each state to come up with more specific actions they can do, with the overall goal is to protect and restore 1 million acres in the region. So that's North Carolina through Central Florida. Cape Canaveral being about the boundary. So you heard from Claire Rapp yesterday. She had the great video because she's working with the Sassy folks as well as Laura Clark. So as I said, those two are underway or done, and they're kind of the foundation for doing all the other work, protecting marsh migration corridors. We also need to increase outreach and training to everyone, consultants, to get these nature-based solutions more common and used, local governments, landowners. And I just wanted to show this map, and Claire gave me this. This is part of that North Carolina salt marsh conservation plan. To me, this really strikes why there's concern and why we need to focus on this. So Claire, Coastal Federation, I'm not sure who else were involved with creating this map, but they took a paper that Carolyn Curran worked on. She's an author with some other North Carolina researchers that looked at a change we can expect in our wetlands with their different scenarios. And so they used the moderate scenario of 1.5 feet of sea level rise by 2050. And so this map shows red, any shades of red are where you'll have losses in salt marsh, and green is where you can have gains. In doing this, it shows that there will be there's expected to be 92,000 acres lost, primarily in that southern area, as well as up in Currituck, and the Barrier Islands in general. And that's because the marshes likely drown. Let's say when we were out there yesterday, you saw there's a lot of marsh out in the middle of the sounds, but it doesn't have any uplands. So where's it going to go? So if it can't keep up with sea level rise, it'll get submerged. So that's one of the reasons there's expected to be a lot of loss there. And then along the mainland shoreline, the slope is steeper, and so it may be too steep for the marshes to migrate down fast enough. But then you see gains in green, but those gains are not necessarily good, because where is that salt marsh going? It's good for the salt marsh, but it's where there is farmland, there are communities. So this is why we feel there's a real need to take some action. The next priority issue was environmental rule compliance to protect coastal habitats. This has been a priority in every plan we've done, I think, because the public overwhelmingly supports enforcing the rules you have, getting compliance with the rules you have, getting the best results for what you have before you have to think about doing things. And so you may have heard in the legislature has provided some additional positions for DWR and DIMLR, because they were really understaffed, and they're still understaffed. And so I'm not the best person to speak to this, but I'm having trouble getting people to take the positions and stay in the positions, and therefore when they're short, compliance checks is the first thing that has to be dropped because of other obligations. Another issue in the 21 chip was wastewater infrastructure solutions. So it was brought up by DWR staff that this is a real issue. It's an issue that's really unseen because the pipes are underground. So even small communities, a lot of small communities amazingly have wastewater treatment plants, and they're not on septic. And they don't have the funding to clean and regulate. What happens is you get eroded pipes and leaks. And those leaks in this photo, the water's coming out. But when it's covered up, it means when it rains, the water goes in. And that overloads the system and can lead to those sanitary sewer overfalls. So DWR said they're looking into how they could get more of the smaller facilities to do maintenance. But then the big one was we just wanted to get the state water infrastructure authority to have more funding to prioritize some of these coastal projects where they're near sensitive waters. So we have met with people involved with that, and they have added, they have a ranking system, and then they've added something if a project is near a nursery area. Haven't seen the final what came out of that, if it's nursery area, if it's gonna drain to SAB. There, we had a couple of categories we suggested. And then the last issue is that we need better mapping and monitoring to assess these status and trends. So science says a lot, and when you can prove, show what the changes are, it helps you know where to focus or how urgently you need to focus. So unfortunately, we really don't have any regularly funded mapping and assessment programs, except maybe Shell Bottom. We have a shellfish mapping program. So in the top right, what we've done is the staff did complete the whole coast, mapping all the different types of shellfish. It took multiple years, took 30 years, because we didn't have the technology then. So we now have a new program that we're, instead of trying to map everything, we're doing sentinel sites across the coast. So this is a photo of one of the sentinel sites, and that's a drone image. And they can do that in one day. They can delineate the strata the next day or so. Then they go back and they get their sampling data. So it's like way faster and way more accurate. So we're just starting this, so there'll be 15 sites, and they'll do 5. They can do 5 a year because the staff also has to do shellfish research and other things. And then they'll repeat every 3 years. Then in 3 years, we'll be back telling you about the trends in those sentinel sites. SAB mapping and monitoring is going on. You've heard about that. This is a map of SAB, the historic SAB that we know of. And you've heard that we've had losses, especially in the low salinity grasses, but they're harder to map because you cannot see them very well. They don't get picked up by the traditional aerial photography. But the estimate is, depending on the water body, the 79% loss is in the new Centarpian, and it's less in the Albemarle. But in general, I think the average is 30% of the SAB in the low salinity areas is lost, and mostly because of the water clarity. And then in the high salinity, there's been lower, less loss, but still, I think 10% was in Bogue Sound, which is where we were partially yesterday. And it's the most developed of the high salinity areas. They don't know if it's nutrients or, water clarity, nutrients, sediment yet. They're working on that. But it's done with a team of DMF, APNEP, researchers from multiple universities. At some point, ECU was helping. One point, DWR staff was helping. It's something, it's a team effort, and we now have a systematic method. Twice a year, we've got it broken into 5 zones, but it's a struggle. So we don't have any dedicated mapping staff. We need some more resources to be able to do this adequately. And then I just want to mention, we do have wetland monitoring, and the map of the wetlands in the bottom is what DWR staff has done over the years through their NCWAM program. And then one other thing came out of this chip was to form a stakeholder engagement for collaborative coastal habitat initiatives. So we call it SECI, and it was to help with water clarity, thus the SECI disc. I had a SECI disc on my boat yesterday, but the current was going too fast, so we couldn't get a reading. Anyhow, the idea is to pull more people in. These are not state or federal employees. These are town, local government. It's a NGOs. It's a variety of people. It's voluntary. So we held a water quality summit to kind of pull in and recruit people. We got folks. We have a core planning team that kind of guides them, that Jimmy is on, and Todd and Eliza here today. But they're the ones that you heard about, the resolution that you passed for more cross-share funding, that kind of was initiated by them. And now they've also done some work on the uniform floodplain management policy. They got onto a committee just to provide input on. That policy is it's being updated due to Executive Order 266. And they were just trying to look at it and provide input on nature-based strategies to make sure there's anything they can do to make that stronger, update it. So that's all we've done so far. There's a lot more to do, but with that, Jimmy or I will take any questions.
Are there any questions for either Ms. Deaton or Mr. Johnson? Commissioner Tierney.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. The mapping initiative, you said there are a lot of different parties involved in that, and you just sort of, it's in motion depending on where the funding is, but is there any one entity that is taking the lead?
AppNet right now is taking the lead. They've been able to acquire the funding to do the photography. We use DOT, I say we loosely, our team. And then it's the sampling that requires more people. So, and then it requires funding to do the GIS delineations of the image.
I just saw where AppNet falls in the organizational structure.
Yeah, okay. Well, AppNet is part of DEQ, but they're funded by EPA federally. And AppNet is very large. I mean, it covers part of Virginia because it's watershed based down to Logan. So we do have SAB south of there, and so DMF has hooked up the cost to get that mapped and sampled.
Can I just interject for those who are catching up on acronyms? APNEP is the Albemarle-Pamlico National Estuary. So it's a federally funded program focused on the Albemarle-Pamlico estuaries.
Thank you.
And just to give you an idea of the area that AppNet covers, we, in Virginia, you think about east of I-95 up to maybe Emporia or Petersburg, and then down over toward Norfolk. North Carolina, we go all the way to the White Oak River, and then inland to Raleigh and Halifax and those areas, and up to the Virginia line. But we are a federally funded program that's run by the state. Money passes through the state. And, I guess AppNet's been around since the early to mid 80s. Doug Rader, who was on the tour yesterday, was actually the first lead of AppNet when he was back in the APES days. The Albemarle-Pamlico Estuary System or study.
And AppNet has been integral because of their funding and ability to get funding. They funded a lot of research in our state. A lot of research in our coast.
Any other questions? Yes, Commissioner McDonald Gibson.
I had a question, which is, you talked about that you're changing to a Sentinel site approach to monitoring, and I'm just wondering how you selected the Sentinel sites.
That's a good question. But we, so with the that's only for the shellfish monitoring. Originally, the program covered intertidal and subtidal, all shellfish resources. And we decided because we want to try and do this rapid approach, we're restricting it to the intertidal shellfish. And because the oysters are really the heart of the pack, right? The initial mapping was done for fishery reasons, for shellfish. Where are your clams? Where are the clams best? Where are the scallops? Where are the, so it really is for all of that, but our focus is the habitat. So because most of the intertidal oysters are from course down south, we're just going for course down south. And we just kind of spread it out and looked at areas that had a lot of shellfish. So we could start out with relatively good areas, because we can't really get near the fullness and then go through that and hope that we can have enough since,
Commissioner Solomon.
Yeah, and Jimmy, you know I couldn't resist.
Glad you're here.
Back to 215, right? Tell me a little bit, and maybe you can give us an update report. I don't want to put you on the spot, but you know, my passion back in 15 and 16 was those shallow draft inlets in the intercoastal waterway. What is the status of those? At one time, the state was maintaining basically 5 of the 7 shallow draft inlets. Provided a lot of money toward it, and we weren't dredging the intercoastal waterway, and it was filling up. So near and dear, I think you stripped a lot of that out in 2021, but we talked about a lot in the 2016 report. But are those inlets staying open, and how do you square that up with SAB? And is the SAB issue that's becoming popular hurting our ability to draft those inlets?
Well, most of the shallow draft inlets are in the southern part of our state,
That's correct.
right? And there's really not SAB concerns with those inlets. And that's done by the Corps of Engineers, but I believe they get some funding.
They get state funding, you know.
Yeah, some of
They
WR,
at some point. I don't know if they do.
WR has a big grant of funding. Or isn't it called, oh, is it called that?
What was it?
The funding source that DWR has for the dredging.
Shallow draft program, but there's 5, right? Both's not part of it, and there's one other, but Lockwood's Folly and Carolina Beach and
Yeah, I think there's.
Fort Topsail, they're all part of it, right?
Yes, sir. I'll follow up with these specific.
Yeah.
Does those plus others.
You can Google US Corps of Engineers shallow draft inlets.
Oh, I've done it. I've done it. I've got it a couple times. So yeah, I do. And I'm just interested in keeping that intercoastal waterway open. I know we've got to do a lot of good things for the environment.
That hasn't been a problem.
Follow on the other question was, it used to be in the Beach Inlet Waterway Association. We had the BIP back then. When we did that. Has the BIP been updated since 2016 as far as dredging, sand on the beach and filling habitat that way? Anybody talking about that anymore?
DCM handles the beach inlet management plan, and now a lot of the counties are, what it has morphed into is the counties or communities are doing their own collaborative beach inlet management plans.
For y'all, how active is the state with that? Is that all core stuff as far as the beach?
The state has some funding, or has had some funding for some of those communities to help re-nourish those, the beaches. But I'm not sure how robust that funding will continue to be.
Have all of the state agencies, we have, do permit review, because it does require permits, and so there's more of a larger scoping meetings for the larger planning efforts of that, those type of things.
Can I just interject, JV, I think that's a really good question, and maybe something it would be useful to have someone from the Division of Coastal Management kind of talk about. Yes, because they do oversee the beach and inlet management plan. I believe there was at least one update after the original plan.
2016.
I don't recall.
See, I didn't see it on the internet last week, and I didn't see it today. I came up with it. I see this.
I don't know, and I could be misremembering that, but Ms. Deaton is correct that there's really been a significant change in the way local governments have begun approaching planning those projects, funding those projects, and getting those projects permitted. And it may be really interesting to this commission to hear what they're doing now, because they've tried to move, I think, a little more toward a model of longer term planning and permitting and use of more general permits, and just trying to create a more comprehensive long-term plan so that they're not having to do individual permits every 5 years, 3 to 5 years. But I think that would be a really good topic.
Yeah, and I just remain concerned because I think we've got to keep our waterways open, but we've got to do something with sand. I don't think throwing back at the beach and killing habitats, and that's my term, I'll have to say that, is the best way to do it. So there's a balance, but it takes a lot of planning and advanced work, and I just don't hear you guys talking about that. And I'm concerned that what are we doing? We got to get rid of the sand, but what are we doing with the sand? And I like your. Two others, but honestly,
I mean, most of it goes on the beaches. If it's suitable, if the sediment's suitable, it goes on the beaches.
Yeah.
And then there are some of those offshore sites.
Any other questions? Mr. Tweedy?
First of all, thank y'all for the presentation. Thanks for a great tour. A quick question, and I'm not gonna get the acronym right, but the initiative that's targeting the southeast, with the 1,000,000 acres.
Tasme?
Yeah, is that 1,000,000 acres of restoration, preservation, or both?
Both. So I think first they gotta quantify it. I don't know how, I think we may have 1,000,000 acres, but we have to, not lose this 1,000,000 acres.
So it's really more of a target of preserving what we have.
And taking action against loss. Looking over there, I don't see Laura here. She could tell us more.
Okay, that's
Also. Todd, do you want to add anything?
I think it's trying to hold a steady state, that we're going to reset things. So the goal is not to happen, that's the function.
Thank you.
So before I take another question, and I will, I just wanted to ask people, since we have a somewhat unusual setup today for the meeting, if people in the audience or on the staff are responding to questions, if you wouldn't mind standing up and identifying yourself, just so we're capturing all that for the record. So thank you. Commissioner Solomon.
I don't know how it's, you got one?
Ms. Deaton, you talk about a lot of new programs and priorities and planning and initiatives, none of which would be free. Okay, even your volunteer stakeholder initiative, you had to have your summit and their staff time involved in supporting that. And you also said that people want to see existing rules enforced.
The public, when we have any public meetings, before when we're planning the chip, that always comes up as another.
Okay. And then you said when they, and I assume you mean DWR, when they're short, the first thing that has to be dropped are compliance investigations.
They mean regulatory agencies,
Okay.
which would include DWR, DNLR.
Okay. So
Often it's because there's time to get the permits issued.
understood. But my question is, you're presenting or describing the needs and priorities and costs for additional work. And then there's a priority on enforcement, but there's not enough money for enforcement. So how do those get reconciled? How do you decide what's more important, a new program, a new initiative, or a longstanding regulatory requirement to enforce things? How does that get balanced?
Can I address that? Because I think that may be more a question for partly the commission and the department. But you really have two different kinds of programs going on here. And most of the programs that have been described in connection with the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan are using grant-funded programs. And many of these are federal grants. So they are passing through from whether it's EPA or NOAA to the states for specific types of research and conservation projects. So that's one set of funding. On the enforcement side, you're talking more about state appropriated funds, almost entirely state appropriated funds. Some of the major programs like the Clean Water Act programs do receive federal grant money generally for program support, but much of the overall funding is coming from state appropriation. So you've got two different types of activities going on that often have totally different funding sources. And I think, Ms. Deaton is correct that often on the regulatory side, if there's a funding crunch, the priority tends to be addressing permit applications because there are legislative and regulatory time limits on responding to those permit applications in a way that there is not a similar time frame for responding to enforcement complaints or for being proactive about compliance measures.
But the federally funded programs and initiatives aren't free to the state. There are direct and indirect costs related to staff and infrastructure.
There can be, and it depends on the type of grant program that it is.
That's why collaboration, it reduces those costs. If you collaborate and you get, some funding from this, some funding for that, it's more economical and you're doing valuable services that are needed. It's sustainable.
Thank you.
The other questions?
I'm just saying,
Commissioner Tom?
and Chair, you said that, so maybe something that EMC discussed. I do think there's a legitimate concern, and we went through this with stormwater. Philosophically, should we spend more time on plan review and document review and permit review? And you hear the development community complain about how long it takes. And there is a philosophy within the department that that's how we prevent bad things from happening. There's another philosophy that maybe we shorten that period, but spend more on enforcement. And so that to me is the balance that you said was how much time do we take up front on plan reviews in the office? And is that the real deterrent, the prevention mechanism, versus actually spending less time in the office reviewing things and more time in the field inspecting? So I do think that could be, maybe in this case, something we could talk about in more detail, because I know it's there on stormwater. So we've had an interagency discussion with staff about it.
And that's always, I think, an issue for the commission and for the regulatory staff. And I know there's certainly been many discussions over the years of ways to address that, find that right balance. But it's definitely a balancing act. Any other questions for Ms. Dean and Mr. Johnson? Yes, Commissioner Miller.
A quick follow-up. When Commissioner Solomon was talking about the dredge material, and you said it's put on the beaches if it's suitable, and then kind of an aside, you said something about in the ocean.
There are some designated dredge, offshore dredge disposal sites,
And that's for material that is not suitable for beach dredge.
or it can be put on spoil island. So like, Moorhead Port, where we were, I think when they dredge close to there, that's not suitable for the beaches, and it goes right there by the port, or it goes to an offshore site. Mostly it's
Okay.
near the ports that you have those disposal. I think those are the two places.
Is there any consideration of using that material for marsh creation?
I think I've heard discussions about that, but I don't think it's been done.
It's
Like
one of the more
on the
successful.
living shoreline, like thin layer dispersal where you kind of put on top of.
Or you go somewhere that's where the water is 4 feet deep and you build it up to a marsh operation. It's thousands of acres are created that way in other states.
We have, our southern coast is very small water bodies. So there's a concern there for request and space.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, two more potential gaps. We've talked about these in the past, but SSO, and being a SWIA member in the past, I know that's easy money to go get because it's in another program. I'm not looking as much for it about I&I as I have the SSOs. Has SWIA, two related questions, has SWIA tied that to the SSOs that are happening, not just to I&I? Because that's the crutch to get some of these small communities that don't take care of their systems some easy money because it's environmental. Right, so I don't like that, but I do like if they're having true SSOs, is that the criteria for SWIA now? And I don't know. Two, as we've talked about this, you've mentioned septic tanks, Ms. Deaton. That's the hard money, because there's no SWIA money for septic tanks. Now, for SMR, we don't have for septic tanks, which is the real problem. Estuary environments versus public. We do it. Septic tanks?
I think I would have to defer to divisional resource staff. That, that gets complicated, and as sea level rises, you're gonna have, drain fields, having salt water, but I'm not a civil engineer.
I'm just saying, it's very easy to blame I&I because there's a pot of money waiting over there and there's communities wanting some bonus points, right? But as you mentioned, the trouble is usually the septic systems, even the commercial septic systems. And there's no bonus money there, I don't think. So that's the hard problem. The other hard problem that I've asked you guys about before, and I know Richard's heard me say it, but bay lakes and duck ponds. We find in both Carolinas with duck. We talk about water quality spilling over into the estuaries from either commercial or just other things, but dealt with that with Lake Waccamaw. I'm an advocate for some of these communities in the Bay Lakes, not to create these septic pools of nutrients that get overtopped and released. That's in the lake, not in the hog farm. So any money on that now? Any special set aside for money to help with nutrients in Bay Lakes or duck ponds or things like that?
Put nutrients in duck ponds?
No, to make sure they don't back up.
Yeah.
And those duck ponds are monitored to make sure they're not building up like we had at Lake Mount Mesquite.
I think, okay, I would have to defer again. I think Todd Miller might know something about that. I believe there was a project looking at duck ponds up, not Mount Mesquite, but in that area. Okay. Bay River area. Yeah, you have to come up here though.
Robbins with the rest of those. There is the whole watershed management plan for not see impact the water fountain dams being looked at. Or about staging times for these.
Yes. Anything else though, statewide? I know Mount Mesquite's took years to get there, but there's a lot of that in the coastal plain out here. Or that's, as you know, obviously. Any more money or studies going on?
For different places, you did cover some. But I think, particularly with SME, we should understand which watersheds are going to get into introductions, and if the elements are issued, that would.
And I'm with you on that. I think it's bad without all this quote unquote free money coming into the system, and we're not spending our money on these type of things. Okay, thank you.
So one thing, I think, in response to that is we have an active role in development of the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan, and we have in the past had 2 EMC representatives on the CHIP steering team. One of those 2 positions is now open, and actually I think we had third member also participating this past year. I don't believe we're necessarily limited in who attends those meetings. We have had 2 official representatives. But I would certainly welcome if members are interested in actively participating in the CHIP steering committee. That's where a lot of those conversations go on about what the priority issues are as the CHIP is updated from one time to the next. So I would encourage folks who do have interest in issues that haven't yet risen to the top in the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan, let me know. I'm happy to identify folks to represent the EMC in those discussions or participate informally if that's easier to do. It's my understanding the CHIP folks welcome that input. And that's the right place, I think, to have it for that next update is think again about what our priorities are, what we're not addressing, and what we need to address in the future. Any other questions for Ms. Dean and Mr. Johnson? Yes. I believe Commissioner Bailey is the current representative. The second representative was Commissioner Anderson, who just rotated off the commission. So that position is open. So those were the 2 official members of the CHIP steering committee for the EMC. So we do have that 1 vacancy. And again, I don't think commission members need to feel that precludes them from attending CHIP steering committee meetings and having input. I think my understanding has been they welcome that. But if someone is interested in being that second official representative to the steering committee, let me know, because we do need to fill that position.
I think it was David Anderson was on there forever, right? And then it was Bob Rubin paired with him. When Bob went off, then we Mr. Bailey on because she's from Carolina Beach.
I was glad I got you.
Well, you couldn't come out there because you live there. You live there.
Right, I said it every day.
But David was on there for a long time. David Anderson, so now we know.
So follow up with me if you're interested, and we'll make sure the CHIP steering committee folks know of that interest. Who will be interested in getting notices of the meeting. One follow-up on septic tanks, and that is another really good issue and another really complicated issue because it's not just a state problem, it's a local and regional health department issue. So there are many players in that set of decisions about where septic tanks are located and when to require removal. I know the Coastal Commission has been looking at that for a couple of years. That's been on their radar on the ocean front in particular, because there still are a number of oceanfront communities that are built on septic systems as opposed to sewer. So that's been an issue of concern for quite a while, and there are people who have been working on that. It has been a difficult issue because of that state, local, and because of how state law just allocates the authority to address some of those issues. But that's another really good topic for a follow-up presentation, and maybe the starting point for that could be getting everyone up to speed on just who has what authority, where those pressure points are and who has to be in the conversation to address those issues.
And to agree with you, I do think, and to agree with both of y'all, that goes back to the enforcement point. I think that it's like a bad tooth out there. You got commercial places on septic tanks, and we can do all the planning in the world, but if you've got something that needs to be enforced or taken offline, we need to do that.
Yes, and we've all seen, I have posted on a blog post, photo of an exposed septic tank on Ocean Beach in North Carolina. It's not a happy sight, and so yes, that's a big issue. So let's follow up on that because I think that's really important issue. Commissioner Dearnay?
Something that was brought to my attention that is, I think would be a useful study if there's ever any funding available. It's brought to my attention by Charles Peterson, who is with UNCS and that's his late Dr. Peterson, chair of the Water Quality Committee, that there is an optimum balance between installation and use of well-performing septic systems versus the development of regional stormwater programs. Because one of the downsides of a regional stormwater program could be increased development, increased runoff, increased generation. So I don't know if any of the universities have ever studied what that optimum combination is in order to protect shoreline water quality, but it's a fascinating topic. Maybe worth thinking about.
Okay, so that's a really good point. Any other questions for Steve, Mr. Johnson? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be hearing from you again. And again, thanks for your help in setting up yesterday's field trip. That really was
I feel like it's a lot easier, it's a lot, I don't know, just being out there seeing it is a lot better communication and ideas exchanged. And
PowerPoint's a wonderful thing, but it's not like
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So our next information presentation is on the ongoing process of reviewing existing rules. And we have Jennifer Everett with the department to make that presentation.
Hello, can you hear me this morning?
Yes.
Okay, great. Was gonna show you what I look like, but that's okay. I'm gonna share my screen and start the presentation. Great. So everybody can see the screen, right?
Yes.
Right? Thank you. Okay, so I'm Jennifer Everett. I'm the department's rulemaking coordinator, and I've been doing this for a little while now. Since I'm the department's rulemaking coordinator, that makes me your rulemaking coordinator. And today I'm going to talk about a lovely process that was mandated by the General Assembly 10 years ago. So Some of you who were around during that time, when we were going through this would remember, and those of you who are new to it, you'll get up to speed because this is starting very soon. And then it's called the periodic review and expiration of existing rules. And the General Assembly codified this, the first codified, trying to move my slide, hide the floating window. Okay, here we go. So the General Assembly back in 2013, they codified a new general statute in the Administrative Procedure Act in 150B-21.3 capital A. And as some of you may recall, back during the last decade, this legislative mandate requires the agencies to review its existing rules that are codified in the code, in the administrative code, every 10 years. And we did do that. We started this in 2014. And our agency, with all of our commissions, we actually completed this process, which I'm going to go over, in 2017. Now it's 10 years forward, and here we are having to do it again. It's unbelievable. And the Rules Review Commission has established a schedule for when agencies need to complete the process. And I'll go over that too for the EMC's rules. So how it starts, and there is a great flow chart, but I'm just gonna talk instead of going through the flow chart. So how it starts is the Office of Administrative Hearings pulls together what is called a report. It is just simply an Excel spreadsheet, and it's usually by subchapter. So it'll contain all of the rules by subchapter in this Excel spreadsheet. And what we're tasked to do, staff will initially, before coming to the committee and then the full MC, staff will do a preliminary assessment as to whether the rules should be categorized or designated as unnecessary or necessary. Definitions are there, it's pretty clear. Some of you all may recall during the first cycle that there were actually 3 categories instead of just 2. Those 3 categories were called necessary with substantive public interest. Second one was necessary without substantive public interest. And then there was the unnecessary category. Since the first round, they have eliminated what is that middle bucket, which was the necessary without substantive public interest. And now there's just 2, unnecessary, necessary. So staff will go ahead and categorize that program's rules as either or and bring to the appropriate committee initially, and with those classifications, and then proceed over to the EMC. Once we get over to the EMC will approve or modify as they see fit the classifications. Then we get to proceed to a 60-day comment period. I'll note that this is not rulemaking yet. This is not readoptions yet. This is a process that precedes readoptions. So I just want to make that clear about that. And I will talk about readoptions towards the end here though. But this process right now I'm talking about is just totally administrative, putting each rule into a bucket, necessary or unnecessary, taking the rule out to a 60-day comment period. We don't have to hold a hearing. And then accept comments on the rule, on the rules themselves or the classifications. And any and all comments will go into that spreadsheet. If there are a lot of comments, probably should be able to fit on a tab or two in the spreadsheet. We are required to provide responses in the report spreadsheet to the comments. But neither staff or EMC members are required to have to respond to the actual individual commenter, because commenter can also be anonymous for this process. So what happens is when rules that were categorized as necessary will have to be readopted, and readoption is just a fancy word for rulemaking, but it will have a deadline in order to be done with that rulemaking. And then rules that were categorized as unnecessary will come out of the code. They'll come out of the administrative code as if it were repealed, unless that rule conforms to or implements federal law. So we are also required, staff, after the comment period ends, staff will be coming back to the full EMC with the report and filling in a column in that spreadsheet that is for the final determination. Staff will also need to provide responses to each of the comments for the EMC's review and approval. This middle bullet here I put in because if, for example, we went out to public comment with a rule that was categorized as unnecessary and we received comment or comments on the rule itself, objecting to the rule, or on that classification, and the agency, the rulemaking authority, like the EMC, if the EMC has not moved that category from unnecessary to necessary, the rule, once the report gets filed over the Rules Review Commission or the RRC, the RRC's primary authority is not only to review and approve the rules, but also to look specifically at where the agency had categorized a rule as unnecessary and received a public comment that is deemed to have merit. And if the agency did not move the classification from unnecessary up to necessary, then the Rules Review Commission has that authority to go ahead and do that right at the RRC's meeting. There's no coming back to the EMC or any of that because of them changing the classification. It just is what it is at their meeting. I will note and say, though, that the one thing that cannot be done either by the agencies doing this process or the RRC is you cannot, if you go out to public comment with a rule in the necessary bucket, you cannot, after the comment period ends, you cannot then move it down to the unnecessary category. That's contrary to the public, really, because you go out to public comment saying, hey, these EMC rules are necessary, we're gonna, they need to be readopted, and then at the end of this process you can't say, oh nope, it's unnecessary, we're not going to do anything with it, and it's going to come out of the code. So that's what that slide is for. So then, all right, so assuming EMC, I didn't put a bullet there, I'm just talking. The EMC will have to obviously take a look at these comments, take a look at the responses that staff have provided for y'all, and approve the report. Then what happens is the reports have to be filed to the Rules Review Commission by established deadlines that I'll go over in a little bit. And I will file the report that will have all of the initial and the final determinations, all of the comments and the responses. and get them over to the RRC. Like I said, RRC's review is to make sure we followed the steps, make sure we did it in time, and looking at our responses, and really in particular whether we received comments on rules that were categorized as unnecessary. Assuming we get the Rules Review Commission's approval, folks at OAH, Office of Administrative Hearing, will then send the report along with the comments, along with our responses, over to a joint legislative committee, also known as the APO. The statute says that if the Joint Legislative Administrative Procedure Oversight Committee meets, or if they don't meet, because this committee usually doesn't meet when the General Assembly is in session, then we have to wait for the 61st day to pass for the report to be considered effective. And then, so that's all just like administrative, like just pretty straightforward. And then again, I kind of already said this already, but so once that report becomes effective, we'll be notified that, hey, these EMC rules right here were categorized as necessary. Y'all need to readopt them and go through rulemaking. And the other ones will expire and come out of the code. Under the readoption process, which is, like I said, a fancy word for rulemaking, we are allowed during this process to propose new language, to amend an existing rule that's necessary. Under this readoption umbrella, we can also repeal a rule that we find, oh shucks, you know, we actually don't need that rule, so we're going to repeal it as we're readopting the rest of these rules. And we can also create brand new rules. So that usually is a question that I get too, that yes, you can create new rules during the readoption process. Okay, so once the report's finalized, you know, we know what we got to do. We get notification from RRC staff attorney telling us we got to readopt the rules that were marked as necessary. And I'll get contacted regarding that it's time for us, staff and the commission, EMC commission, to establish a readoption date. And this is a new nuance, a new, well, it's law. Well, it's a rule. It's not in the 150B, but the Rules Review Commission just this year created and modified some of their existing rules regarding this process. And I must speed up. Okay, so all right, so anyway, we'll be contacted to have to establish a readoption date with the Rules Review Commission. And they codified this new rule here in their rules that say that we need to provide written documentation of milestones and planned dates and steps that we're going to take during the readoption process, and provide any of our rulemaking priorities to them in order to get a readoption deadline that is realistic for us. So that's a new thing that we'll be doing next year. All right, so I'm almost done. So the EMC has a bunch of lovely rules, and the first rules that you'll be seeing coming your way beginning at the Water Quality Committee in November, this November, are the dam safety rules. Because the Rules Review Commission has established this deadline for the report to be in front of the Rules Review Commission by September. So our dam safety engineer will be providing the first part of the procedure at the Water Quality Committee in November, and then over to EMC in January. And then you can just see, we'll just continue right after the dam safety rules, water resource folks, a little bit of Dembler for wet stormwater will be coming to the EMC beginning, well, they'll go to the committee beginning in January. And then it just keeps going on all through 25. And then I squished all these in here because that's the end of all of your rules and how they were scheduled by the RRC. Okay, sorry if that took too long, but that's my presentation. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions for Ms. Everett? Yes.
Is there a comprehensive schedule that helps us? There are a lot of steps in there.
Can you speak up a little bit louder? I have my.
Is there a comprehensive schedule that helps break down the individual timelines? Since there such a large group of moving pieces moving through a process, might the individual steps for each room.
I have not done that yet because, well, there's a lot and things can change, but I will tell you that I think that staff and the commission can successfully meet these deadlines with counting backwards by about 8 or 9 months. That they'll have to start at the committee and go to the EMC, 60-day comment period, and then go back to the EMC. But I have not, and I did not have time to lay out exactly when all of these rules will be starting out in each of its appropriate committees and going to the EMC yet.
Perhaps it would be helpful to clarify what the date represents on this slide. So the September 2024 for the dam safety rules, what does that date represent?
It's a date that you have to start and go backwards. So this September 24 is the end date, which means that the 60-day comment process of all this needs to be done, approved by your EMC, and submitted to and filed to the RRC the 20th day of the month before it's scheduled. So for dam safety, all of this needs to be done and filed to the RRC no later than August of 2024. August 20th, the 20th day before the meeting.
So again, to clarify one more time, this September date, for example, would represent the date by which the EMC would have to have determined whether the dam safety rules individually were necessary or unnecessary, have had that public comment period. And then the September date is the date by which that decision would be going to the Rules Review Commission for review. Is that correct?
Pretty much. It's more to clarify, that September date is the date where these reports will need to be, well, the dam safety report will need to be on the RRC's September agenda.
Mr. Solomon.
And then Jennifer, that will start, RRC will look at that report in 3 or 4 months or whenever, and then we'll have the actual adoption date to take them through the rulemaking process after that, right? So that's just the necessary, unnecessary, that report to establish, right?
Right. Once the report becomes effective, then I'll be contacted from an RRC council to try to establish a realistic readoption deadline, which in the past, when we did this before, staff did present to the committee and the EMC, I think, that proposal, what staff proposed, however many months or years they proposed, that has come before you all, so that you all will be aware of what we're going to present to the RRC as the proposed readoption deadline and the milestones that were indicated in that rule that we need to show the RRC of how we're going to meet that readoption deadline that we're shooting for.
So just to, I think, restate, the September 2024 deadline for dam safety represents the date by which the EMC has to have gone through the first steps of identifying rules as necessary or unnecessary. That's the primary step where the Rules Review Commission has some review authority. Otherwise, they have a relatively limited role in the adoption process. And the readoption process itself will not begin until after that point. So this is not a deadline for readoption.
Correct.
It's just a deadline for the first step of sorting into the two buckets of necessary and unnecessary and getting that proposed classification to the Rules Review Commission.
Yep, you're correct.
One more question that may help Commissioner Davis clarify too, just to follow with that. You know, air quality did their, division did theirs in 6 pieces when we actually went through the process. Do you remember, Jennifer, if they did that on the necessary, unnecessary first step, or did we get the necessary, unnecessary done, and then they said, now we're gonna go out in 6 different waves?
Yeah.
Do you remember how we did that?
Yeah, it was the latter, what you said. They did, you know, they did the periodic, the bucketing all together first. And then, because they have over like 200 rules. And so then when they had to go through rulemaking, also known as readoption or vice versa, they divided those out into groups. Mm-hmm.
6 pieces, and then we did the schedule based on that.
Well, we had to have the schedule established before they started on those 6 groups, but yeah. You know, I think that air started with more of their less controversial rules as they were going through rulemaking to meet the readoption schedules. And that I'm sure there's many pieces of why they divided them up into groups, other than the obvious fact that there's a lot of rules in those 2 subchapters that they have. But yeah, they divided them out into 6 groups for the readoption process. But all of those 6 groups had to meet one readoption deadline. The readoptions can come sooner than what you have been given as a deadline. And that's what they did.
Any other questions? Commissioner Deerhead?
I'll just comment that the previous, I want to make sure I'm correct here, the previous readoption was the first time this program was ever in. And so it was a very thorough review of the rules and decision making. Do we anticipate that this next round we'll be able to do it a little more efficiently, because probably there will not need to be as many rules declared necessary this time, given the short period of process.
I think that's a really good point. I would hope that having gone through this once, that we've got a good foundation, and there would be fewer rules that would need to be examined for that initial determination, necessary or unnecessary. I think that's likely.
Staff less time to reassess, given this, that they have the institutional knowledge. Previous review.
And my memory is, and other folks would remember this even better, I think there were quite a number of rules that just needed clean up the last time because they had to address things that changed, even simple things like rules that included the department's mailing address. I mean, there were just a lot of things like that that have never been re-examined, and so hopefully we'll be starting with a smaller base of things that really need eyes on them this time around. So question over here? Yes, Commissioner Welcome.
So just to be clear, the staff makes recommendations for the buckets, necessary, unnecessary, and the commission to file decisions.
Correct. And then that report goes to the Rules Review Commission. Any other questions about this process? I know we're all excited about it. I know, time flies. Well, thank you, Ms. Everett. We appreciate it. I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Let's see. Our next information item is the response to questions about the wetland legislation this year. I'm going to suggest that before we start into that, we take a 5-minute break. So 5 minutes. And we'll be approximately 10:45.
I guess.
Praise the lead. So the next agenda item is a discussion of the wetlands provision in the North Carolina Farm Act. We had a brief discussion of that at the previous meeting and asked for some follow-up advice from the department and the department's legal counsel on the scope of that provision. And so we have Taylor Crabtree with us today from the Attorney General's office. You have in front of you a copy of a memo responding to the specific questions that were asked as follow-up to the last meeting. So we'll start by asking Mr. Crabtree to present his response, and then we'll take time for members to ask questions, whether follow-up on these specific issues or any other questions related to that provision. So thank you, Mr. Crabtree.
Good morning. As Chair Smith said, my name is Taylor Crabtree. I'm an Assistant Attorney General with the Department of Justice. Here today on behalf of the Department of Environmental Quality, Fish and Water Resources. I'm really the opportunity to speak with you all today. As Chair Smith mentioned, I'm here in response to some questions that the Chair asked for our views on. And you all should have in front of you a hard copy of the memo, but if anyone did not get one and would like one to look at during the presentation, I've got a couple extra copies up here. I'm going to give just a brief summary of the 4 questions and the department's responses to those questions, and then I'm happy to take any further questions that you have. So the first question that we were asked is whether the definition change in the session law in 2023-63 will affect the application of wetland standards currently set forth in 15A NCAC 2B0231. The department's answer to that question was yes. 2B0231 sets standards for wetlands as that term is defined in 15A NCAC 2B0202. And because the session law specifically directs the department to the commission to change that definition, and the session law narrows the category of wetlands to which the wetland standards will apply. The second question the department was asked was whether the legislation impacts regulatory coverage for isolated wetlands, including basins and bogs, that fall outside of Federal Clean Water Act jurisdiction. And again, the department's answer is yes. The regulations for basins and bogs are found in the 2H 1300 rules. Those regulations also refer back to 2B0202 for the definition of wetlands. And so because this session law acts on that definition, the 2B02 definition of wetlands, it also impacts coverage for basins and bogs. Specifically, 2H 1301 defines the scope of wetlands that the rule set applies to as isolated wetlands that are not regulated under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. And because the session law now changes the term wetlands to include only federally jurisdictional wetlands, there will be no federal jurisdictional wetlands that also meet the definition of an isolated wetland under 2H 1301. And so there are no longer any wetlands to which the 1300 rules would apply. Third, the department was asked if, because the 2H 1400 rule, temporary rules, also rely on the definition of wetlands set forth in 2B0202, whether these rules will be rendered unenforceable with respect to any wetlands that do not require a Federal Clean Water Act permit. And again, the department's answer was yes. Because Session Law 2023-63 limits the definition of wetlands in 2B0202 to federally jurisdictional wetlands. There are no longer any wetlands to which 2H1400 temporary rules would apply. And finally, the department was asked whether the definition change will affect the implementation of other EMC rules. And again, the department's answer was yes. Any other rule that relies on the definition of wetlands in 2B0202 would potentially be affected. And we provided in the memo that you guys have a non-exhaustive list of other rules that incorporate that definition by reference and thus would likely be affected. I'm happy to answer any question. I know I went through that quickly, so I'm happy to answer any questions you all might have on any of those issues.
Are there questions for Mr. Crabtree? Mr. Butler?
So what I'm understanding is because all the other rules reference to be a two, then that basically negates it. We'll go back to square zero. Figuring out a new rule and that will affect all the other rules. Correct?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, because
Isolated wetland, back to
Correct.
those others, so that cause the farm bill as stressed to be a two, and all these other rules have to change.
that's may have to change. They are affected by, as I understand, if we understand the Farm Act, it implements immediately. So in the intervening time between when rulemaking might happen, it takes effect, it replaces the definition of 2B0202 and thus has an impact on all of these rule sets.
Are there other questions, Mr. Durack?
So these actions mean that the state of North Carolina no longer, in the eyes of those who wrote the legislation, have isolated wetlands that can be protected. Is that correct? Are there any isolated wetlands in the state now that there is some authority to protect?
So if by isolated wetlands, you mean wetlands that are not federally jurisdictional, I think, then yes, that for purposes of this commission's wetlands rules, that's correct. Now, there are other state laws and regulations that may, sediment protections that may address some of those issues, but in terms of this commission's wetlands rules, that's correct.
Then what is correct, that there are no isolated wetlands that can be protected?
Yes, through the wetlands rules, yes.
Are there other questions from Mr. Crabtree? Yes, Mr. Butler.
Because the 2023 Farm Bill references the whatever federal statute or federal rule would be obligated to August 30th, I think. Feds put out their new, have you guys looked at that in comparison with North Carolina's existing rule to see what some of the differences would be or the losses were? The reason I'm getting to this point is you hear a lot of sensationalized numbers of how much wetland loss we have because of this change. And some of those, it appears to me, go back to taking from the Obama rule, which was never implemented in North Carolina, taking how much acres that would be, and then backing that down to where we are now with this different new rule, the site decision. And has there been any analysis to compare those two, to see where we are from the existing North Carolina rule, where it was pre-Farm Bill, and looking at the new promulgated rule that is now Mr.
I think those efforts have started. I think we are still waiting to some extent on seeing how this is going to be. Process is just beginning for So some of that, the full extent of the impacts is not really going to be known until we start to have some more on the ground how the forest and will.
My questions would be for Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Ellison.
Just a comment, I concur with what you said, because until the Wilmington district figures out exactly how they're going to implement August 30th, I think that's when you should have enough information for advising us exactly on what the parameters are for.
I guess my comment too, more was a textual standard. For you know, does the rule that we have in 202B difference between what being proposed textually? What those differences may be. Sounds like it was.
Yes, I think there are differences, right? You can see on the page that there are differences, but I think in terms of how those differences are going to play out in terms of the actual wetlands affected, giving that on the ground experience could give to understand the impact.
I think that is the question. The EPA core rule makes a very basic change to align to that rule with the federal decision, the Supreme Court decision in the second case. And that by itself tells you a limited amount about what that means on the ground. And so I think we are going to have to wait and see, wait at least a little bit and see how the Corps actually implements the new standard and see what the trends are to really have a good feel for the effect on the ground in North Carolina. And so again, for those who weren't here at the previous meeting, would you like to, Mr. Crabtree, would you like to just basically state the holding in the Sackett case?
Sure.
Just to, so we're starting at the state foundation here.
Yeah, so in the Sackett case, the question presented before the Supreme Court was essentially the meaning of the basis of the Clean Water Act, the scope of that term under the Clean Water Act in terms of defining which wetlands constitute waters of the United States. And the holding of the Sackett decision, I'll paraphrase it, but I have the opinion, so I maybe just read the exact text. But it covers only those wetlands that have a continuous surface connection with the navigable water, to paraphrase. So that's the holding in the second case, and that holding then has been applied to North Carolina waters of the wetlands through the Farm Act. So that's kind of the background.
So as I understand it, the process the Corps is going to have to go through under the Sackett decision and the new rule is sort of two-level decision. One is, are they looking at a surface water body that is navigable waters under and therefore waters in the United States, as that's been defined by this decision. And with respect to wetlands, the only wetlands that would be considered federally jurisdictional would be wetlands that have a continuous surface connection to a water body that is considered waters of the United States. So they're going to be looking both at streams and whether they fall into the new definition of waters of the United States. And then the second question is, do wetlands also fall into that category by virtue of having a continuous surface water connection? Did I say that correctly?
Yes, yeah, yes.
Commissioner McDonald gives them.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, so then the Corps is going to go through an entire process of basically redelineating wetlands across the United States and.
So even there may be someone else, Richard may want to address this, but I think the short answer is they're not going to do a comprehensive redelineation. What they're going to do is respond to requests for applications. And so people are going to come in with their development application and they think they may need a section 404 permit and they'll ask for a stream and wetland delineation. And that's the point at which I understand the Corps will begin applying the new rule and the new guidelines.
So, I mean,
Commissioner Solomon.
in seconds we're reading, I know you academic, so you'll read it, but it is worth reading because in the background case, the homeowners were half a mile away from the nearest water body. And they went into this wet area and they filled their site and they built their house. They basically got nailed by the cord so they could not occupy their house because it was an isolated wetlands. They were looking across saying, well, the water's way over there. And so what they basically came back and ruled was that that's not practical for people. People need protection from inadvertently polluting something or causing damage to wetlands. So there needs to be some nexus, which was connection by water. Justice Kavanaugh's opinion with the majority, where he said he disagreed with it, was because when you build dikes and levees, you're cutting water off behind it. So there may have been some nexus that man changed with a dike or a levee. But he still said in his opinion agreeing with the majority, that being said, that was the worst of the evil, or the best of the evil. The worst was to have individuals not know easily what a wetland is, that we need attorneys to tell us what wetlands or not, or consultants like me, that's right. So, or somebody, but I think it's worth reading, because you look at what it's trying to do, and it's really trying to make it more practical for people to understand with your own eyes. An ordinary person, they talked about that, an ordinary person could tell the difference of what a wetland was. That was fair to the regulator. So that's what the Supreme Court was trying to get. And I think that's what the court's going to try to do. But I'll have questions for you. I see Mr. Lane here too, Mr. Rogers. I want to put you, I thought you were the ranking guy here on water resources. Oh, no. Welcome, Mr. Lane, when it's time. Mr. Lane.
Back,
Any other questions for Mr. Crabtree? I mean, I think, to just follow up a bit on the importance in that decision of continuous connection to surface water is one of the anticipated impacts is that there were federally jurisdictional wetlands before that have been determined to be federally jurisdiction based on the groundwater connection between the wetland and surface waters. And it appears that one of the clear implications of the SACA decision and the rule change will be that those will no longer be considered jurisdiction. Any other questions for any other victims in the room?
I mean, it's all interesting. I know it represents the AG office, represents us as a rulemaking body, but Mr. Lane represents DEQ as the enforcement.
So do you have a question for Mr. Lane or for Richard Rogers?
I think Mr. Lane will probably maybe both. So the question would be, so what? The regulated community doesn't know what's going on. When I look at the website and I look at this conversation, we're going to wait on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to figure this out. What are we going to do with permits, guys? What are we advising people? Do we have an isolated program in North Carolina or not? Are you not enforcing the isolated program at all? There's one on the books from 2015 in legislation, and your AG has said it's not applicable anymore. Are you just letting people build on those wetlands now?
but currently we don't think we have the authority.
So you're not? Okay.
But what we're doing is waiting for the Corps to get the guidance out, with the energy process. And we're referring people back to older applications if they think there is an impact. It's out, start. So we're waiting. We will be updating our website, making sure folks understand. We currently continue to work on projects we had in-house prior to. That discuss the folks and
So the following 2015 legislation was a project specific to North Carolina. It was a program that covered part of the wetlands, not all the isolated wetlands, right? Based on where they are geographically and their size. That have you talked to the General Assembly? I don't think it was the intention of the General Assembly to make that program necessarily go away.
We don't know.
Have you asked
and we're going about the attorney that advise us at this point. I think we've got other opportunities, right? And we'll continue discussion, legislative interest in the parties. Back to the table, we got this legislative session that doesn't seem to want to end. Trying to wait till it gets and then look toward points, see more discussion with all interested parties in the state. Help management in the state.
But that's a choice of DEQs. I mean, you could go to the General Assembly now and say, let's change that 2015 legislation to match this, and they could make that happen soon.
It's not in a perfect right now, but they're not. I think.
Have you tried?
Yeah, we talked and they're not an interest at this point to move forward in this session. They're having enough trouble seeing it. We're on this, we're preparing to talk with the other interested parties, to try to get this, resolved as soon as possible. Start. Tip in that short session.
Any other questions? Commissioner Carter?
As a procedural matter, seems like to me we're in kind of an odd situation. We've got a permanent rule that we put forward last fall that went to RRC. It's also, it was to replace a temporary rule in place. Don't we need to start moving on both of those and pulling them back, because they're certainly not consistent with where we are today?
So I think there's a very real question about when the EMC needs to move forward with some sort of rulemaking to make the rules consistent with the provision in the Farm Act. My recommendation would be to wait, because the legislation itself, the Farm Act provision, is effectively self-implementing. The division, the department has been directed to implement the wetlands program based on the change, the new definition of wetlands that is in the legislation. That has already begun, that will continue. And so the rulemaking isn't necessary to change the implementation of the program that's already in place, because the legislation itself mandates that. We too have heard uncertainty about what the intent of the Farm Bill provision was and whether it may have gone further than folks who were involved in developing that legislation actually intended. And because of that, I do expect there will be additional discussions of that between now and next session. As Mr. Rogers said, there doesn't seem to be an appetite for revisiting the issue now. But since there will likely be additional discussion of that, my recommendation would be that we hold off, not take action based on something that may change again in a few months. In the meantime, the department will be implementing the wetlands program as required under the legislation. By early next year, I would hope we would both have a better feel for what is happening on the federal side, and perhaps a feel for what the legislature may or may not want to do. And you know, the 2B rules are also on that schedule for rule readoption next year. They're in the first batch of rules that we'll have to look at for readoption under the some that Deborah talked about today, which, if there were a conclusion that based on the status of things early next year, that some of these rules may no longer be necessary, we can deal with it in that process, or we could go to freestanding rulemaking if that were the better way to go. But my recommendation would be to wait until we have a better picture of what's happening with the state law and implementation of federal law before we start into that.
Well,
Yeah, Commissioners, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm not particularly concerned against the permanent rule, because it's just sitting there anyway, it's not in effect. But the temporary, I do have a concern about the temporary rules sitting there. And it's on the books. I understand that they're not going to enforce it the way it's written, I guess, and basically, but we still got a rule sitting there that we know is effective, at least in major respects, maybe entirely. It strikes me that is, I don't have a problem at all with your idea of going forward with some new rule once we have a better feeling of this whole thing. But we do know that temporary was just way effective. It seems like we ought to think seriously about pulling it back to clear things up, and then at an appropriate time, early next year, probably we go ahead with whatever is needed to implement the Farm Bill and any further information we get out of the General Assembly.
And I think that's something yeah, if commissioners would like to discuss that, we can certainly discuss that. I mean, I guess I don't view the temporary rule as being different from any of the other rules on this list, and including the isolated wetlands rule. They are all now out of alignment with the state law as a result of the change in definition. So it's not simply a matter of the temporary rule being in conflict. We have multiple rules that are in conflict. So I would prefer to look at it more holistically and at a point when we have a better idea of where the issue as a whole is moving. But that is certainly something the commission can discuss.
And Commissioner Carter makes a good point, and that's what I was going to follow on with, that somewhere, and I believe it may be on the DEQ website, it doesn't say DEQ is not enforcing that temporary rule. It says that EMC is not taking it back from the RRC. That was a vote I lost. But it seems like we should be writing a letter to the RRC now, since there's public record out there that we decided not to bring the temporary rule back. And I'll make that motion, by the way, to say to the RRC, because of this, the matter's closed, and we're not going to, even though we voted not to take it back, we're not going to touch it anymore. The matter's closed to us because it's null and void according to our attorneys. And then the EMC is off the record with not pulling something back from the RRC. Right now, we're still on record as not pulling the rule back that he asked us to pull back. My was counselor, not making the rule. I don't like that being on the record. Pulling it back when we know it's not on board. It needs to be cleared up, in my opinion. So I think it's a good point.
Do you have any comments from the perspective of the Rules Review Commission process? Councilwoman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The commission decides at some point, it's sort of listed as an information item. The commission decides at some point to withdraw the non-core wetlands. So we're drawing the ones that have been ejected to the permanent ones, and we're drawing, which by effect would withdraw the temporary ones. Certainly happy to act if the commission directs me to. One request that you would be gracious enough to allow me to say that we continue to disagree with how they reached that conclusion, but recognize that this change in law is now addressed, has addressed the authority issue and withdraw it. Because as I told the commission at the time, my concern is that the 150B-19.3 have been read in a manner that never been written before. It's not supported by the statute. So that would be my one request, is to say we disagree with the grounds, but now this new development.
And just a clarification in terms of the process. The process would be, as I understand it, to request return of the permanent. The temporary rule is in effect only because the commission did not request return of the permanent rule. So it's not an action we have to take with respect to the temporary rule itself, which was originally approved by the Rules Review Commission. It's an action with respect to the permanent rule that the RRC objected to.
And I would argue respectfully that I think it would be debatable if it was challenged, but whether a temporary rule that specifically has only a 6-month duration can be on the books for 2 years. I know there's a lot of legal background and stuff, but just practically speaking, temporary rules were not designed to go more than about 6 months.
And that is a separate question. I mean, I think, but procedurally, where we are with the Rules Review Commission is the action the RRC took was with respect to the permanent rule. It's the permanent rule we would need to request to be returned to the commission. And if we did that, the temporary rule would automatically cease to be in effect.
Well, that may be the short answer to that would be under that program. Question. I understand and Bill's point about the objection to the process, but that's beyond the boards now. I mean, that's a fight for another day. I understand why. I'm not objecting to it, but it seems like it's just a procedural matter now. Then drawing that rule, and that has the effect, and we ought to make that really clear that it does have the effect of pulling every rule off the books, and not Richard can put that on his website, and I think that would clarify everything and satisfy the question I had.
I dare say it will not clarify everything.
No. That's just one question.
Or even good books. Commissioner Deere.
I support the chair's position that we're in transition mode and we don't have all of the answers for us yet. And it's probably would save everyone a lot of time down the day. We wait to see what guidance we're going to receive, but also just the impact of making this decision. I think it might be premature. I would not want to act on the motion today. I would want to know the implications are. And we have new members who are not familiar with this history. They need to be informed before we take a vote like this. I also will remind everyone that the temporary rule was presented to us by the division in response to concerns that were expressed by the private community about the availability of mechanisms needed to process permit applications. They were seeking guidance from the commission and from the department. And that's why the temporary rule was put in place. So I do think it would be premature to take any action. To see what the outcome is going to be. Application of this new legislation.
So one question for Council Reynolds, if I remember this correctly, the permanent rule included changes to two rules, correct? It was a package. So it was changes to the isolated wetlands rule, and then it was a new rule that covered other non-jurisdictional wetlands. So just so we're all on the same page about what that permanent rule consisted of. It was actually two rules and amendments, which included amendments to the isolated wetlands rule.
And I will agree with Mr. Deere. This isn't anything, Commissioner or Councilor Reynolds, sorry about that. Said it is an information system, so a motion probably isn't proper today. But I would like to put it on the agenda for November as an action item, perhaps for you to consider, Madam Chair. But maybe the council and the department can get this cleaned up before we even meet it somehow. Make it confusing to the public, the regular.
And I think that's a good suggestion. In fact, I had already thought it would be a good idea to have a follow-up item on the agenda in November for a number of reasons, including as other federal partners, but as slow as they are, we may not know a lot more in November than we do now, but we'll probably know something in terms of how they're starting to apply their new guidance. So we'll have a little more information about that. And so I think it is a good idea to put it on the agenda in November, and we can have an update on where things stand with the federal implementation and any other issues, including potentially the implications of requesting return of the permanent wetlands rule. Yes.
Madam Chair, just note that we will not be waiting to update the website. We'll wait to get that on state. For the wetlands.
Any other questions or discussion on this? So we'll plan to put it on the agenda in November to talk both about follow-up on what's happening at the federal level and also what the implications would be of asking for return of the permit. Yes, Mr. Hill.
Can we come out of that November meeting after this discussion with a relatively aggressive agenda for how, what rule making, what process we're going to follow? Because there are rules in the review process that eventually we'll get to, but it may be beneficial to the regulated consolidates and things and move faster. And I think by November, we'll know a lot more about what the board is doing, because the work has been pretty aggressive in multiple different methods, or in their outreach to the regulated community after the second decision. The individual districts had to wait on the rule that came out August 30th. They were ready for we'll be very soon. So I think, like I said, I think that the regulating community
reduce the uncertainty from DEQ. And there are, you suggested there may be some uncertainty in the department. I think there's enough certainty that we could lay out a plan of action to move faster than talk about it, wait, go through a long and protracted process. But a lot of this stuff is very simple.
Well, that's where I would certainly disagree. I don't think it's simple at all, particularly given the number of rules that are potentially affected. And that list on the last page, it seemed pretty clear at the last meeting that the implications of changing the wetlands definition goes well beyond the two rules everyone was really focused on. It has a much broader implication than that. I share the concern that many of those implications were not at top of mind when the Farm Bill provision was being discussed, and that there are likely to be additional discussions over the language in the Farm Bill. Maybe not, but I think it would be wise for us to wait and see whether there's going to be additional state action before we move to repeal or make substantial changes in what is a significant list of rules with a lot of implications for water quality. So that's my personal opinion. I don't think it's prudent to move ahead before we have some idea of where this issue is going at the state level. And I don't feel like I have a good understanding of that at this point.
If we were to wait until develop the understanding you see, what would be an optimistic schedule? Stuff on what you
An optimistic schedule.
to get to addressing some of the rules that are.
Well, it's essentially, I don't know that any of our rulemaking schedules are particularly optimistic, but it's the process it always is in the rulemaking. And so we're talking about months.
We can do temporary rule. We got grounds for temporary rule. This is changing federal and state stuff, so we could go temporary and cut out the regulatory and type analysis and do that in a few months, 6 months.
I think that may depend, we certainly have that tool. I think it, again, may depend on what the common understanding of the scope of the Farm Bill provision is. Because I really don't think anyone was thinking about the list of rules that Mr. Crabtree's memo identifies that are affected by that wetlands definition. And so there are things I think we could do relatively quickly when we decide to do them. There are other things I think may have broader implications. So I think in part we're going to have to work through this over the next few months and figure out what rulemaking process, what rule changes are needed, and what rulemaking process best fits whatever the changes turn out to be. Commissioner McDonald.
Yeah, I would just say scientifically, I think this is a really complicated issue. To me, defining wetlands, I mean, if they have to have a permanent connection to a surface water, that's sort of counterintuitive to as a scientist what I think about a wetland. A wetland is an area that's intermittently saturated. And if you suddenly remove protections on a vast quantity of that, there really could be some very severe implications for the state in terms of downstream water quality impacts on fisheries. So I do think it's prudent to move slowly. Something like this.
Commissioner Solomon.
No, and I'll just add, it's how it happened. We got a rule we changed in 2019 as part of the rule adoption. That several of us questioned, staff said it's no big impact, and that was tying wetlands to waters of the state. Now we're taking it back to the definition it was, which was the federal definition. It's just amazing to me with government, how we talk about adaptive management, make a change and go back. It seemed like it was easy to change it, and we had all these consequences out of that change in 2019, and now we try to go back, and we can't go back because we got all these consequences of change. Well, we had that in 2019, and everybody said it was tough.
Well, let me just interject one thing. I don't agree with the first part of your description. I wasn't here for the 2019 rulemaking, but I can tell you that one thing that has not changed in state law is the definition of waters of the state. And the legislative definition of waters of the state has always included marshes and wetlands. That has not changed. And so that was the foundation originally for the state rules that regulated wetlands as waters of the state. So again, that has not changed. That is in legislation, not in rule. But what we now have is a more specific directive about the types of impacts that this commission can require permits for and set water quality standards for.
Just, again, you're the chair, you set the agenda, but I think we need to be ready to take action too. I mean, I'll be ready to do something as you suggest, and I may lose that vote, but I think the regulated community needs this commission to do something to help the department. That's just my opinion. Others will have maybe counter opinions, but that's okay. I think we need to really discuss that as an action.
Well, we will put that on the November agenda and see where we are. Any other questions or discussion? Excuse me, Commissioner Butler.
So, did not state my questions as eloquently as I should have earlier, but I think you hit on it. All these rules that are on this last page are back to one rule that we need to change. That's what I'm getting at. So we basically have one rule we need to change. All these other reference that. We now have a federal rule that is in effect as of September 8/23. That we now can reference to start developing that rule. So I agree with Commissioner Solomon and Commissioner Ellison. To me, like we need to go ahead and start taking those two pieces we have now, because good God, we wait until or making a decision on how they're going to implement for years down the road. It's going to take a long time to do that. We have documents right now that state what the rule is. CFR now get challenged and they change. It does have rules that we know where we're from now that we can start holding to that CFR. So I guess I agree with both discussions. Looks to me like we need to start moving forward with that and having the discussions, getting that one rule fixed so that now we can take all the other.
And we can have that discussion in November, but I will say, I think it was in July that I think Commissioner Solomon indicated he did not understand the Farm Bill provision to have as broad a scope as we now understand that it does. And so my point is, there seems to be still a great deal of uncertainty or perhaps lack of agreement on exactly what changing that definition was intended to accomplish. And so I guess my cautionary note continues to be that we should be careful about changing rules, repealing rules, if there is likely to be additional discussion over that provision between now and next May. Because I don't think it's particularly helpful to the regulated community to have that kind of churn going on where we're in the process of amending or repealing rules while in fact the legislation may be under further discussion and make that unnecessary, perhaps inconsistent, and we don't know. But I think it's worth our taking a little time to get a better understanding of where that's headed, and we will certainly talk about it. Commissioner Ellison?
Just follow up on what you said, getting us better understanding. How do we secure that understanding and who's responsible? Understands what the legislature.
Well, I think the normal process, and I'll defer to the department if they would like to weigh in. I mean, the department is always engaged in conversations with legislators and legislative staff. So I would expect if this is really genuinely still an issue where there may not have been a meeting of the minds entirely, that they will be in those conversations between now and next spring. To get some more clarity about whether there's support for clarifying any part of this. if there's anything, Mr. Rogers or the department would like to add to that, but that's the normal legislative process, and they would then come back to us with kind of information they may have about expectations for the next legislative session. Anything else on this subject? If not, thank you, Mr. Crabtree. We appreciate it. And to the end of our agenda, we have the director's comments. Mr. Abrazinskis, would you like to go first today on the Division of Air Quality?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome the 3 new commissioners sworn in today. Look forward to working with you. A quick ozone season update. While we continue to attain all of the current ozone standards statewide, we have had 30 exceedances so far this summer, including 2 here in Beaufort, which is really unusual here at the EPA monitoring site locally. So it's certainly been one of the more active years we've had in a while. And yes, wildfire smoke has played a role in some of those ozone exceedances. Our analysis shows that a violation of the ozone standard is very unlikely this year, especially as we're getting towards the end of the peak of ozone season. However, we're looking ahead to next year. We're doing the what-if calculations, and that analysis shows that a few sites in the Charlotte area could have a 4th highest value that could result in a violation of the ozone standard next year. That is possible. That is mathematically possible. We'll keep you updated as our planning and our analysis continues with regard to maintenance of that standard.
Mike, just since we have 3 new members, you might want to explain the difference between an exceedance and a violation.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So the form of the ozone standard is a 3-year average of the 4th highest 8-hour maximum value at each site. So at a site here in Beaufort, you take the 4th highest from this year, last year, and the prior year, average those 3 4th highest values and compare them to the standard. And if that calculated metric is over the standard, that's a violation. On any given day, however, we could have an 8-hour average at that site that exceeds that value of the standard. We call that an exceedance. And so I'm giving you that exceedance count that is certainly different than violation. So thank you for that opportunity. That makes sense. All right, next topic this morning. At our prior meeting, I shared that DEQ has been designated as the lead agency for the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants, or CPRG program. This is a grant program under the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA. This program provides grants to states, locals, and tribes to develop and ultimately implement plans for reducing GHG emissions. A multi-agency group led by DEQ and working with our colleagues and other state agencies worked together on a work plan and an application submitted to EPA in April, and ultimately that was approved and awarded by EPA in July. Under phase 1 of this program, a priority climate action plan will be developed and submitted to EPA by March of next year. So our team is working toward that objective now, including colleagues in the State Energy Office and DAQ. We're working to synthesize and prioritize potential GHG reduction measures from the many state planning documents that have been compiled over the last 15 years or so. And that effort will take into consideration the variety of factors that EPA has laid out as part of this program's requirements. Once we have that final synthesis report and a set of preliminary priority GHG reduction measures identified, we will announce those and share those through a stakeholder process to get feedback. We expect that series of stakeholder meetings to be in both virtual and in-person formats, starting in October and running through early December. And a website for the effort has recently been stood up. You can get there by going to the Climate and Energy tab on the DEQ page, and then to the State Energy Office. You'll find information there. It's at that website. We'll be posting more detailed information as the project evolves, including the details and dates of the upcoming stakeholder process. That's all I have this morning, Madam Chair. Let's take any questions.
Questions for Mr. Abersinskas? Thank you very much. And is Director Ansel?
Yes, Madam Chair. So actually, it's no longer Director Ansel. For those of you who know, it's a temporary assignment. So I wrapped up my assignment to Denmark to return to my primary role at the Office of General Counsel. Unfortunately, the new acting director, Mr. Toby Vincent, was unable to be here today, so I was asked to fill in one last time. But other times.
Thank you. Mr. Scott, Division of Waste Management.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. I'd like to welcome the new members to the Environmental Management Commission. Look forward to working with you. I'd also like to announce a new member to Waste Management. He's previously our section chief of the Hazardous Waste Program, but Adam Gulishny is now our new deputy director. So he's covering some meetings for us in Raleigh today. Couldn't be with us, but really welcome Adam to that new role in Waste Management as our deputy director. We continue as Waste Management to coordinate with other DEQ programs regarding the active evergreen plant site in Canton, North Carolina, removal of above ground fuel storage tanks, impacted soil, and further assessment of fuel oil and releases of light liquor are underway at this site. This work is also being done in coordination with EPA through a removal action. And we also have upcoming PFAS sampling that will be occurring at this site starting next week. A series of 26 groundwater monitoring wells are being sampled for different water quality parameters, groundwater water quality parameters, and a subset will be sampled for PFAS. Other PFAS work, we continue to coordinate with other divisions on PFAS across the state. PFAS sampling is underway at North Carolina sanitary landfills starting July 1st of this year, and expanded work at a lot of North Carolina's military installations. There's additional PFAS data that's coming in from now Fort Liberty, which used to be Fort Bragg, looking at sites where AFFF and other sources of PFAS have been used at military installations. We're also excited about our Bernard Allen program within our Division of Waste Management and their continued outreach efforts for their new pilot program, which is offering private well filters for those who have been impacted by PFAS with private well drinking water sources. We've actually had our first applicant to this new pilot program to help cost share or fund PFAS filters in this particular scenario where PFAS detections have been made. And I always try to give a reference to brownfields when I can. There's no formal rules for this program before the Environmental Management Commission, but especially Commissioner King always enjoyed the updates. We did attend a groundbreaking event in the town of Lowell outside of Charlotte at a former textile dye manufacturing facility called the Crompton and Knowles sites. Our Superfund, brownfields, and solid waste sections have all been involved with this site. Once again, related to North Carolina's vast textile manufacturing history that sits along the Catawba River. This site is currently being demolished and will be positioned under the brownfields program along the parts of the Catawba River for a town of Lowell maintenance facility and city park. So just want to point to that great coordination. There's also some federal removal actions at this site. And just points to North Carolina's continued transition from our history with textile manufacturing to a lot of great redevelopment projects with these associated sites. That's it, Madam Chair. Thanks, Dr.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Scott? Commissioner Tierhays.
Thank you. Regarding the camp, sure. Can you remind us again about the owner's post-closure responsibilities for the landfill?
Right, so we've been working with the facility, as Commissioner Tierhays has mentioned, has an industrial landfill for material that came from the previous plant manufacturing processes were disposed of there. And so they have specific solid waste requirements for the continued operation of that landfill. We're coordinating directly with Pactiv and their consultants. The landfill will continue in operation for a specific time frame. And specifically to your question of post-closure, we're looking at the financial assurance aspects required of that facility and some requests by Pactiv regarding that financial assurance. We're evaluating that right now for the future care of that landfill once it does fully close. Right now, they propose to reduce the the working surface area, working face area, but not formally close it immediately. So great question, and we're in active coordination with them through our solid waste program.
Have they predicted a date?
I know that they're needing to use it for different processes and closing down other parts of the plant. So I think it's going to be potentially years plural, not necessarily months, would be my initial answer to your question. I can get that confirmed with program staff, but we're in active discussions with them on that front. And that landfill will also be sampled, as my earlier reference, also for emerging compounds, meaning PFAS. So a lot of data coming in on that front.
I have a question for Director Rogers about the wastewater treatment plant lead Sistron.
Fisher McDonald Gibson.
Yeah, just a quick question about the Bernard Allen Fund. Does that support house filters or just point of use, like understand? That's number one. And number two, does it support any maintenance, like purchase and replacement cartridges?
Great questions. Question number one, it will support both. So the question is, different types of filters. When we talk about emergent compounds, some go directly into the sink, like a reverse osmosis unit. Other systems filter all of the well water before it enters the home. And so this particular pilot program will address both. And we've also looked at augmenting the program to even consider municipal water line installations where that's feasible. And as Chair Smith knows, we've had this program for quite a while. This is a new aspect of it to try to help with emerging compounds and where they're detected.
Any other questions for Mr. Scott? Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A few things I want to go over. Obviously, these things are in my director's report, which you can read in more detail. We've talked several times in committee, Water Quality Committee yesterday. Vacancies continue to be a challenge for us. However, we are in place last week, 60 vacancies. This week, we're down to 57, so things are going in the right direction. Great improvement from the 110 or so I was talking about last year this time. So we're excited about that. We've made one key hire as well this past week. The section chief for our regional office has been hired. John Hennessy has taken that job. He's a longtime employee with the department. He's worked in the NPS program, compliance, and enforcement issues. One thing that we're working here in transition with John, he's going to keep some of those responsibilities so that we can work on enforcement and compliance and consistency in our regions and bring that to the regions, which is always a challenge for us. So we're excited about that. Division continues to work on emerging compounds. One area of focus is our drinking water. While y'all don't have authority to do anything with drinking water, we have set out on extending our testing community systems across the state. We have slated 605 systems testing for. We completed tests on about 153 of those. We're getting the results in to get a better understanding of the impact of PFAS in drinking water across the state. Permitting front, back to Evergreen, obviously is a focus of ours. We are working with them closely about with their regarding their wastewater treatment facility. They're in a phased process of shutting that down. As Director Scott said, things are going to take a little time. They in that process. One of the things that they will be ongoing is they also treat the waste for the city of Canton. So they will be doing that, phasing down, reducing their flow to where they're just treating that waste. Phase out and closure of that, I think, is probably around March of 2025 is what the current status is for that. Another area that we're working on, we're coming up with renewal of general permits in our animal feed operations program. I mentioned this in the last meeting. We currently have 5 public hearings scheduled for October. Those are detailed in my comments, and you can those as well. I typically have a comment related to the legislature. The budget is not done, so we're awaiting that. Obviously, it has impacts on us as a division and as a department, but we're patiently waiting for that, and hopefully things will get resolved in the near future on that front. A couple other things that we're working on as well. Algal bloom is the season. Fish kills. I detailed a few specific examples. One of the challenges we have in the field is with additional requests to go out and assess these situations, we've had to prioritize the situation, and we've got a protocol where we prioritize the work and make sure we get to those and respond to those. As well, I've got a little drought information as well. We've got some moderate drought across the state. About 22% of the state is under moderate drought, and only 2% I'm sorry, I might be misstating that. Normally, abnormally dry is 22%, and only 2% of the state is in a drought situation. So, one last thing, thank you for your participation yesterday. I want to again thank the North Carolina Coastal Federation for their participation in organizing and supporting this effort, and also the great deal of work that coastal management and also the Marine Fisheries Division and their staff did to get that organized. I think it was a good, great success. That's all my comments. Glad to take any questions.
Questions? Mr. Sullivan?
We haven't talked about it recently, but I know the ARPA money's out, and you don't control the ARPA money or related money.
Yes.
But word is it's kind of slow at times. Is your permitting being affected by that, or
we are
affecting it in any way with permitting?
We're on the cusp of it hitting us. We are permitting. We're seeing it in the fast track permit area. So we're getting hit there with the grind to reallocate staff and find support staff in order to keep those moving quickly. We typically don't have an issue on timeline. We haven't yet, but we're struggling in that area. So we're looking at existing staff and working with other divisions actually to see if we can coordinate and expedite those and make sure they're out in a timely manner. We continue to work with our PMO office to get additional staff online. We have 20 positions that we have outstanding that we need in order to make this happen. Working hired. We talked about our hiring challenges. Those continue even with those open positions. But we're getting ourselves organized so that we have processes in place.
Question was really working in other states, that money's going out faster. I don't want to see you get blamed. The money seems to be getting in hands, but I don't want people to say it's not getting hands in North Carolina as fast as other states because of your permitting situation. And
I agree. And as I said, we're getting to that. So our efforts are to make sure that we don't hold those up. A huge focus, and we spend a lot of time making sure that we got this.
Any other questions for Mr. Rogers? Thank you very much. And again, thank you and your staff for all their work putting this meeting together. Committee chairs, 2 committees met yesterday. So Commissioner Davis, Water Quality Committee.
Water Quality Committee met yesterday. We had one action item related to local programs for the stormwater development implementation for the Houston Tar Pamlico watersheds. There were 20 programs that were presented and was approved. Other than that, I think the division starts from supporting the system. Make sure that we occurred and that we got it.
Thank you. It went very well. Commissioner Deerhake, the Air Quality Committee.
Yes, thank you. We had one action item and it regarded the revisions to 02Q 0802 gasoline service stations and dispensing facilities. This item is approved by the members to come to the EMC in November, and so you should be expecting to see these revisions. It's outgrowth of a request from 5 large gasoline stations in the state. The improvement in emissions control and its dispensing stations and the vapor recovery has led to some relief for permitting VOC emission November.
All right, so the other two committees did not meet. Commissioner Bailey, do you have anything from groundwater waste management you want to mention? Although the committee didn't meet yesterday.
Right, it didn't meet, but I will welcome the new members. I have 3 new members, Commissioner Baumgartner, Ellison, and McDonald. So welcome to the committee. And forward to working.
And Commissioner Lee's water allocation also did not meet yesterday.
That's right, but we are hoping to meet in November or January, depending on the commission's schedule when this comes. And I also would like to welcome the new members to the water allocation.
Thank you. So any other commissioners' comments? Commissioner Carter? Commissioner Solomon?
2 things, Commissioner, Director.
That should be.
Director Roger mentioned, we haven't done a lot of this with the EMC, but we did some of it with SWIA. It takes a lot to put these meetings together, so thanks staff going on the road, it just takes a lot, and so thanks. What I saw today went well. Thank you. The other thing is welcome the new members. It's a distinguished body. I don't feel like I should be one of the senior ones here, but I think we all have something to contribute, and as we've talked, we've got a really good economic and social and environmental together in our decision. So I think all you guys bring different perspectives, and it's always been that way. So welcome.
Commissioner Deerhead?
And I also thank the new members for joining and big time commitment, with you all, and especially working full time. So we appreciate the contributions that you're going to be making. And I also thank everyone for arranging this meeting. I think the last meeting that I attended that was out of Raleigh was in Asheville in the early 2000s. So it may have been a long time since this has been done. Although it's very nice, but it takes a long time.
Commissioner Bailey?
I just again like to reaffirm all the good work that was done by the people that put this together. Rich Grounders and the Coastal Federation, and it was very impressive to hear what everybody had to say. As a member of the steering committee on the CHIP plan, I think it was great that we had a presentation today, that got to go in the field and see it all, because we got more work to do on that. It's like some of these efforts to get grants for putting in muddy shorelines, protecting the salt marshes, et cetera, are going to become more important because we may not have so we have to look into everything. Thank you.
Commissioner Tweedy?
I'll just echo what my colleagues have said, just make well, appreciate information. Thank you.
Commissioner Davis? Commissioner Harris?
I can also echo, I appreciate it. I have a different perspective leading state government, now working with local government. So it just amplifies everything for me, but a different perspective. So I do appreciate this today. And also, I think I have everyone's name, and as these hearings pop up, I'll be the one working with the chairman to approach y'all to serve as hearing officer. So again, just getting everybody ready. Now that I know 10 years of rules, which has been very have a thing as well as the wetlands and stuff. So again, thank you, staff.
That's right. We made sure we had your emails before you got the message. Commissioner Bowman.
Thank y'all for the warm welcome, for the board to serve our commission. Again, good my comments too. Very good field tour yesterday and presentation.
Commissioner Ellison.
Pretty much all this.
Commissioner McDonald-Gilson.
I'll just say thanks for welcoming me to the commission, and I'm really truly honored to serve. And just echo everybody else's thanks for the wonderful tour yesterday.
Mr. Reese?
Yes, I feel like it's going to be an exciting time on the commission in the next several months, and looking forward to that and working with the new members. And kudos to the team of folks that organized this meeting. It was very well done, and the boat trip yesterday was just a very nice, informative way to understand some of the things that are going down at the coast.
Thanks. And I don't have much to add beyond that. Again, thanks to everyone. I'm glad you said the word team, because I think we tended to thank Richard, who union staff certainly had a big role in playing this meeting, and the Coastal Federation, which also did. But as you saw on the boats yesterday, there was quite an array of folks from different nonprofit and academic organizations who contributed to making that such a success, and I really appreciate all of their time and energy. The only thing I will mention beyond that is you received a list of new, not entirely new, but an updated list of committee assignments. There's one error on that list, somehow in making the changes. Commissioner King was left off of the Waste Management, Groundwater Waste Management Committee. He's still on that committee, so we'll get that fixed, but he's still there. I'm going to fill the civil penalty remissions group that at the moment doesn't have a chair. We'll fill that chair position for the next meeting. And otherwise, I think that's all. And again, I'll just repeat from our earlier conversation today, anyone who's interested in being more involved with the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan process, and particularly the steering committee on behalf of the EMC, let me know, because I think that's very useful. Because I know there's quite a range of interest in issues, and that's a great place to start relooking at priorities as we make progress on some things and need to move on to others. All right. With all that, the meeting's adjourned. You can have a safe trip back. Wherever you think it's going to be. Yeah.